all so very much for coming today, just to share your opinions as much as I would like to share with you what I know, what little I know about humanity and sexuality, but it'd be great to hear from you afterwards. So I'm going to give a talk for about half an hour, 40 minutes or so, and then afterwards you will have a chance to ask all the questions you ever want to ask that you were afraid to ask. Today is the day that you can ask. Okay, you're in a safe environment. We are all amongst friends here. And so today I'm going to talk on the topic of sexuality and humanity. Yes, it's true what Shireen said. I was a gynecologist. It's strange because sometimes while I was a gynecologist, there were, it was some sort of a running joke. My whole life revolves around women. I've got women nurses, I've got patients who are all women. The only time the men will come is because there is a sexual problem and they need to discuss, so the husband comes along. But other than that, they don't consult. They just come along to accompany the wife. And then, other than my nurses who are female, I've got daughters, 3 daughters with me. My son, who's the only son, has gone overseas. So at home I've got 3 daughters. I've got my wife with me. I've got a maid who comes in once in a while, who's also a lady. I got a dog who's a female dog, and I suspect the fishes in my pond are also all female. So that's how my life was until about 10 years ago. Then I heard the call of God and I became a pastor, and I found that, wow, being a pastor is even harder than being a gynecologist. And but here I'm again speaking on the topic that involves not just only women but both sexes, about human sexuality, or sexuality and humanity. Why I chose the topic, not just human sexuality alone or sexuality, but sexuality and humanity, because they are both intertwined. We are talking about sexuality that concerns human beings, concerns us. There's also sexuality among animals too, so let's not forget that. So here I am today giving a talk on sexuality and humanity. So I could see that some of you, many of you in fact, came with expectant faces, hoping that this will be a sex talk, right? Well, it sounds a bit crude, but in a way, it's right. It's a talk about sex, okay? I'm going to talk about sexual orientation and sexual identity. So it is a talk about sex. And basically, so that we are all on the same page, so that we all know what we're talking about, I need to be able to explain to you what human sexuality is about. Sexuality is about the sexual sensation and intimacy of living beings. As I said, sexuality doesn't only involve human beings. All living beings has this sexual sensation, or else they will not lead to reproduction. So it's a sensation as well as the intimacy of living beings that leads to reproduction. That's just sexuality. It involves feelings, involves thoughts too. I mean, even animals can think, dogs can think too, right? And it also involves relationships. More importantly so, especially for us human beings, it involves relationships. And it results in the ultimate, all-important, all-encompassing objective of reproduction. I believe that this sexuality was given to us as a gift, to all human beings as a gift, so that we may be able to propagate the species. It would be scientifically and statistically inconceivable, unimaginable, in the absence of a universal heterosexual, meaning male and female, relationship, in order to bring about reproduction. Imagine if all of human beings were of having sexual relationship only amongst the same sex. Within a few generations, we would be extinct. There will be no more reproduction. So generally, I believe the natural order of things, there has to be a heterosexual relationship. So when it comes to human sexuality, that's about us, right? You're all humans here, right? No aliens, no animals here? Anyone? If you are here, please say your piece or whatever. Be silent. Okay, nobody. I heard a hem somewhere. Okay, it's about a way that we, human beings, express sexuality. And human sexuality is how we express and experience the sex themselves, experience sex themselves. So how do we express it? One way to express it is through sexual orientation. What is sexual orientation? It's a way of expressing sexual behavior through a pattern of sexual interest in the opposite, or in the recent trend nowadays, in the same sex too. It is put together by totality of 4 aspects: experiences, systems, sexual attributes, and sexual behavior. Start off with experiences. What are experiences? Experiences when person becomes first aware of the sexuality. And a young child, perhaps, it's believed that child even as young as 4 years old are very aware that the difference between whether the male or female. But mostly, even before they are 4 years old, the parents will assign the sex of children. You know how people differentiate between baby girls and baby boys? By the color of their mittens. Okay, or the color of the clothing they wear, blue or pink. Okay, they are blue. But the babies themselves don't realize whether they're boy or girl. But they become first aware that, hey, I'm different. Without even looking at the genitalia, they realize they're different. It's the first awareness of the sexuality when they're very young. And then as they go into the teenage years, do you know that, there's a study by Durex. Durex is a condom manufacturer, international condom manufacturer. They always conduct these studies. And in Malaysia, in the Malaysian context, you know what? Give a guess. How old or how young do you think our Malaysian teenagers will have their first experience of sex?
16.
16.
No.
Very close.
13.
10.
13.
10 is
Not sure.
Yeah, about that. Between 12 to 16 is 14. Their average age is 14. So many of you are parents, you have got 14-year-old teenagers. It's not to say that all of them will experience sex by the 14, but they have discovered that more than 50% of teenagers have had the first sexual experience before reaching 15. So the 14 plus, they already have the experience of sex. And it doesn't stop there. It goes throughout the whole of life, the different sexual encounters. So that forms part of that human sexuality. But then it's not only the individual, or not only between two persons, it's a whole system, the whole social, economic, political environment that we live in. How families, how societies, how governments shape our thoughts on sexuality. And we would develop, as a result of that, attitudes on sexuality. For example, there's a superpower in the world, there's somewhere in the West, I think you know where, who, and it is imposing their values on same-sex marriages on many countries, forcing many countries. And they went to this African country, that starts with U, and they impose it upon the president to introduce same-sex marriage or legalize same-sex marriage. But the Ugandan president, and I'm quoting him not in the exact words, but I'm paraphrasing what he said there, that people who have different cultural values should not impose their values upon us, because we live in a region of the world which we have our own cultural values and our own moral standards, even in the failing of those other countries of having these moral standards. Powerful words, but he said that. So generally, the government, communities, families do form our idea of how sexual practices, sexual behavior should be like. Then the third one is sexual attributes. Essentially, it means our sexual characteristics, how we are formed physically and physiologically. In other words, outside, inside. Yeah? Outside is our male and female features. The external features, male of course will look different from female, right? Our brother Clayton, that he was wearing long hair from the back. I would have thought sometimes he was a woman, but now he's kind of short. So these are stereotypes that we have. He looks so handsome today, with janggut and all that. So there are certain stereotypes that society accepts as male features, female features, but we should not stereotype each other. But unavoidably, we have these external features of sexuality, but they're also internals, our hormones, our chromosomes, the internal genital organs. They determine how the sexual characteristic of a person is. And these are all the stuff that we have. Each one of us have those. And finally, there's the sexual behavior. What is it that fulfills the human sexual needs? Sexual behavior. That includes our sexual practices, our relationships, health, and includes things like STDs. Yeah, you know what STD is, right? Yes, sexual transmitted disease, not straight transmission of direct information or something like that, not the IT thing. And also contraception. Now, all these things are important, and in totality, all four of these experiences, systems, attributes, and behavior form our human sexuality. Then you ask, how our sexual attitudes form? Well, this is a lot of research, a lot of studies have gone into it. And there are social studies, psychosocial studies, sexologists, sex experts. They've done studies. I'm quoting just one study amongst many from the Melbourne Royal Women's Hospital. The study came out that our sexual attitudes are predominantly formed by environmental factors. Surprise! How come our sexual attitudes are formed by environmental factors? With many, even in schools, in many countries, they're taught that it's our genes that determine our sexual attitude. These environmental factors, what are they? Some of them are our parents, our peer groups, and when we log into media, and also by our teachers or mentors, our coaches. Nowadays, we have life coaches. What the life coach, the gurus nowadays, we say, speak into your life, and you begin to form certain ideas. You look up to the person, and you begin to want to take after the person. So, our sexual attitudes can be formed by this person. Biological factors are important. They matter, but they do not feature prominently. There is no such thing, and I can clarify that scientifically, as a homosexual gene. None at all. Yeah, none at all. But there is, however, a thing called neuroplasticity. What is neuroplasticity? We may be predisposed towards certain sexual inclination to different degrees, but at the end of the day, our circumstances play a great role on how we turn out. In other words, we can be wired up in a certain way, but it's the external environment that will cause us to rewire ourselves. And these are studies that using CT scan to see which part of the brain lights up. And when a subject is moved into a different environment, the same stimulus which caused one part of the brain to light up will change. Not the stimulus, but the part that lights up will change when you move into a different environment. And that's neuroplasticity, meaning that it can be wired in one way, but ultimately, a sexual attitude is a choice. It is a preference. We all have a choice in our sexual preferences. Now, sexual preferences is a term that you don't often hear nowadays because it's not a politically correct term. It's been couched by other politically correct references of, like, for example, sexual orientation, sexual behavior, sexual identity. You don't use the word sexual preference because it implies that you have a choice. And there are certain people with an agenda to push that says that you don't have a choice. So therefore, they don't use the word sexual preference. Where you are born, who your family, who your parents are, your culture, your religion, and the social circumstances, they all have a profound influence on your sexual attitudes. Friends too, the company that you keep, the friends are very important also in shaping ideas about sex, including identity and orientation. Let me quote you one example. How many of you know who Bruce Jenner is? Caitlyn Jenner? Yeah. Bruce Caitlyn Jenner. You heard of Caitlyn Jenner. We're not so sure. His previous name was Bruce Jenner. Bruce Jenner lived for 66 years as a man. He has 3 marriages, heterosexual marriages, with women, raised. In fact, he had 4 stepchildren and 2 children of his own, 2 daughters of his own, and he's been starring in movies and shows, including the Kardashians. Have you heard the Kardashians? Or the Kardashians, or Kardashians, yeah? He was in that series of movies with his wife, and he got so accustomed to the celebrity status. Then when he got divorced from his wife, as many do, he has already had 2 failed marriages, the 3rd one, he divorced his wife, and the year after divorce, he had a car accident, and after that, he came out, so to call, out of the closet, and declared that all this while he had gender dysphoria, and he was actually a woman in a man's body. He became the world's most famous transgender woman. He has something, if you look at his Facebook, he's got 15 million followers. A lot of people look up to him, but yet at the same time, a lot of LGBTQ lobbyists and transgender people, as well as feminists, criticize him for his behavior because it looked as if he's used that as a media for him to further his career. He continued, and to further prove a point of this criticism, he married, or no, he's not married actually. He went to a relationship, a living together relationship with a 25-year-old woman, while claiming that he is also a woman, a transgender woman. So it appears very much that the circumstances that he was put in, the friends that he goes around with, the community that he is so accustomed to, play a very significant, major part in determining a gender identity or sexual orientation. You would have noticed by now that many terms that are related to the adjective sexual, like sexual practices, sexual behavior, orientation, preference, attitude, and so on and so forth. These are all terms which actually carries about the same meaning. There are very tiny, subtle differences between them, but they practically all mean the same thing. And often these minute differences are magnified, made 100 times, 1,000 times more important, so that people get confused and they start arguing amongst one another whether this means the same thing, that means the same thing, and in the midst of the confusion, the enemy, the very good principle of art of warfare, you can read the Sun Tzu Art of Warfare. The main thing is to cause distraction and confusion in the enemy, and then you sneak in unknown. And this is exactly what people with some sexual preference or agenda have. And they cause major confusion and division of opinions. So, may I implore to you, don't be taken in by all the subterfuges that we may see. Then I come to the importance of human sexuality. It is of paramount importance that we must be aware that this evening topic of sexuality refers specifically to humans. We're talking about human sexuality, namely you and I. As I really clarify and confirm, there are no aliens here, right? So, humanity is far different, far superior than any other living species there are on Earth. And you all agree?
Yeah.
Right? You and I know it. And this includes human sexuality. We are made that way, very different, both male and female from animals, physiologically, psychologically, socially, spiritually, holistically, and so on. We are made different. We have thinking faculties that are way above, way advanced, and also, therefore, sexual behavioral patterns that can never be compared with animals. The Bible calls it, human beings are made a little lower than angels and crowned with glory and honor. Each one of us have an individual identity, unlike animals, unlike people who think they may be animals, in fact. Like our fingerprints, each one has an individual fingerprint. No other living species in this world have fingerprints that are non-identical from the next person or the next individual in the same species. We are all created purposefully that animals can never have. And that, may I put to you, includes our sexuality. So human sexuality itself is a huge subject that features prominently in everybody's life, ranging from the cradle, when the gender assignment, in other words, male or female, is given, to some time near the grave, where one might still have to worry about sex life, how to get on with it, even when they're 60, 70, 80, or even the sexual orientation of your children by the time, if you're not worried about sex life. You think, oh my goodness, my children, it's going the serong, the not so straight, maybe. Or even a confusion as to which toilet to go to. When you're getting older, you need to go to the toilet, right? And then nowadays, you're having gender-neutral toilet. Can I go in? Can I not go in? Should I go in the male one? Should I go in the female one? If you go in the male one, I just saw a female go in. What do I do? So this confusion features in every part of our lives. Well, in the short next 20 minutes or so, I will not be talking on a lengthy discussion about every aspect or the bits and bobs of human sexuality, but I just want to bring up a couple of contradictions that has been plaguing a lot of us. And these contradictions may be worrying for some, but yet liberating for others. What are these controversial sexuality issues or contradictions? The main two issues are gender identity, that is, to which sex do you identify with, and sexual orientation, whom you're attracted to and want to have a relationship with. So while I offer a scientific viewpoint on this, I shall also touch upon a Christian perspective of how we view human sexuality. Let me just bring out a table for you. What leads to the controversies and the confusion? Next slide, please. In sexuality, the conflicting views that we are. Essentially, to simplify things, the world is divided into two views. Either the postmodern view or the conservative view. The postmodern is otherwise known the societal. The world adopts it wholesale. Many countries, like recently in Singapore, the Article 377, I believe, on Constitution, which outlaws same-sex marriages or same-sex relationship, has been repealed. So even our neighbor down south has already gone the way of many Western countries. So this is generally the societal view. It's also known as the postmodern, the post-truth, that truth actually doesn't matter anymore. Truth becomes relative. And then they have the conservative view, not necessarily only the Christian view, but a conservative that many other faiths do, like the Jewish faith, the Judaism, the monotheistic faith, our Muslim brothers, they also more or less adopt the conservative view. So let me just go through. I have got 6 points here. I'll go through it very briefly, but if any time you find I'm going too fast, I tend to have a tendency to speak very fast. Okay, it's almost like how they said how the Hong Kong people have sex. They just go in and out within 5 minutes. With due respect to any Hong Kong people here, but it is recorded that in again the Durex study, they found that the country that has the shortest duration of sex is within that time. So I tend to speak very fast. Okay, I'm going to talk first of all about how the postmodern view the human identity. In the postmodern view or the societal view, the human identity is defined by our feelings and desire. We use our bodies in ways that are contradictory to our biological identity. What does it mean by that? Well, it just means that whatever we do, we live in a world of individualism. In the sense that everybody wants to be different from the next person. Where did it start? It started about 300 years ago when the Frenchmen, trust them. When anything has got to do with sex, we always blame the French. The Voltaire and Rousseau, they're the French philosophers about 300 years ago. They came up with the primacy of human reasoning over divine revolution. So what happens then? There was a failure of human reasoning. People begin to find out that human reasoning does not arrive at the truth after all. People will argue amongst one another. Nobody can come to a conclusion. So what they decided to do at the end of it is that reject the objective truth. We go for your own truth. Subjective truth. Your truth is your truth, my truth is my truth. I live with my truth, you live with your truth. So as a result of that, there's no external authority, and we come to our own conclusions, and we live our own lives. Well, it results in a society that where everybody says, we are free to be myself. I'm being authentic, I'm being real. But real to what? Relative to what? We have a freedom of expression. And there's no right, and anyone else has no right to question how. If I say that I'm obviously standing before you, I look male, but I say I'm female, you've got no right to question me. And if I say I'm asexual, again, you should have no right to ask why do you choose yourself to be asexual. Of course, you can ask politely, but you have no right to question me and to judge me. So therefore, this results in a shift in a lot of cultural values in many societies, so-called progressive societies. And it impacts the way the gender identity is being defined, as well as the sexual orientation is being perceived. This person, who is a prominent American writer, she's also a feminist, she says this: I consider myself neither gay nor straight. That's why I came up with the title, gay or straight. But she considers herself neither gay nor straight, neither male nor female, neither human being nor animal. There are people who go to the immigration counter at airports nowadays, and when they ask, sir, he will say, address me as they or them. Not sir or not he, not madam, but as them or they. So we get this sort of people who claims that I have freedom to express myself. Then, what is the Christian viewpoint of it? What do we do? We believe that our identity is being determined by God, by the Creator. What do you mean by that? Well, earlier on I talked about Psalm 8 verse 5. But right in the very first book, in the book of creation of Genesis, when all things are made, God says He created man in His very own image. He gave man worth because man is created in the image of the Creator. In the image of God, He created them, male and female. So, from there we can see that there was worth of every human individual. Not only that God gave mankind worth, every individual worth, he also went to the extent of expressing his love in a way that was inconceivable to many, many people. That while we rebel against God, while we yet sinners, God showed his love, and he came and he died so that we could be reconciled. At the end of the day, it's about a relationship. Remember earlier on I talked about sexuality. It's about building relationships. It involves feelings, thoughts, and building relationships. Isn't that true sexuality? But what happened? After all that nice, beautiful creation, why did man follow it? We decided to be rebellious. Everybody did what was right in his own eyes. And what happened was, there was a deception right at the beginning, and it carried on through the generations, even up to today. And it started with just one question. Did God really say? And it went on and on. So today, whenever there is a truth that you believe, even scientific research presents a truth, then the question will always be asked, are you sure it is really the truth? And deception creeps in. And that's how it is. But while we believe that deception has crept into the world, the Christian perspective on sexuality is that we still attempt to do the best we can. We build hospitals, we organize groups of people together to try and help those who are in need of help. Like in times of war, in times of crisis, there are relief organizations, there are hospices, there are even some earlier. How did these hospices start? The monks, they went into monastery, and from the monastery, they helped the poor, the marginalized, the last, the least, the lost. They were out there. And even up to today, even nearby, around us, there are soup kitchens that are being run often. So in a way, while there is deception, there is a fall that's happened, and mankind's thinking have been warped. There is still this desire, the need, the drive from a Christian perspective to try and correct, to correct a wrong that has been done, to make right a wrong that has been done. Then the next part is in terms of sexuality. How does the world perceive it? There is this culture. I'm sure you all are familiar with this word, Tinder. Right, I see smiles, nods, right? Tinder basically is essentially an app. In this our digitalized age, Tinder is a dating app. But it goes more than just dating. It's part of what we call this hookup culture. What is this hookup culture? It replaces dating. Dating is troublesome. You must buy roses, you must book a nice restaurant, you must spend a tremendous large amount of things, and then you must woo. The guy must woo the girl, or the girl must be attractive, dress up, buy dresses and all that to be able to attract the opposite sex. Why go through all the trouble? No relationship, no commitment, no exclusivity. And you can have a largely physically satisfying experience from kissing even to sexual intercourse. I'm not saying all Tinder people who subscribe to Tinder do that, okay? Don't get me wrong. But it becomes a platform, and there are many other platforms. I understand there's also a China platform that does the same thing. Yeah, I don't know the name. I read the name before, but I forgot. Any of you know? Yeah, the China equivalent of Tinder. You don't have to put up a hand, it's okay. You don't have to tell me about it. But basically, what it does is that it creates a drastic divide between what is physical and emotional intimacy. It belongs, again, I'm so sad to say, another Frenchman in the age of enlightenment, okay, by the name of René Descartes, brought about this concept called Cartesian dualism, a divide between the body and a person. In other words, a human being is not a person until he proves that he has worth. In other words, a baby is not a person until he's able to come out and start surviving on his own. Therefore, nowadays you hear of abortion going beyond the age, the 12 weeks gestation, even to mid-trimester abortion. Even in New York itself, they passed a legislation that abortion can take place anytime up to term. Because the baby is not of any worth. That is Cartesian dualism, where if you can imagine a two-story house, basically the occupants stay in the house and are free to move up and down. But this is a two-story house, like many of those poorer countries, where the lower ground floor is rented out to one family and the upper story is rented out to another family. So therefore, what was possibly one house become divided into the upper story the higher faculties, which becomes the personhood of the person, which in where our emotions, our mental faculties lie. And that's separated from our body. So in other words, it cheapens the body. It dehumanizes the body. The body is only used to satisfy desires, hungers. And that results in a lot of things. We make the human body objects of art. You see that that's a skeleton. That is actually a real person who died, who donated his body to be displayed as an object of art. The sanctity, the respect, the honor that's given to the body, which was once a container for the soul and spirit, is no longer there. So the body becomes a shell, an object to be used any way you like. Hence, it can be used for sex any way you like. But is that how the Christian perspective is? The Christian perspective looks at it differently. There's a sanctity and the intimacy of the sex. Genesis itself tells about the institution of marriage, where a man and a woman has to leave all. Leave is not just physically living, it's leaving everything, the culture, the thoughts, the feelings of the family behind, and even adopt a new. Throughout the Bible, you get even like a Ruth or Moabitess who left her country to marry a Jew. And then they went back into Moab, and then they went back into Israel. This lady Ruth left the family, everything, her culture, to adopt the culture of a different family and to be part, to be one flesh of that person that she's married to. So, and in the New Testament, it talks a little bit more about it. In Ephesians 5, when it talks about the institution of marriage, that husbands are told to love your wife as much as Christ loved the church and gave up himself for the church. Wow, that is unconditional, sacrificial, tremendous love. Not many people can fulfill that, but that is contained within the confines of marriage. And that is that intimacy, that sanctity, that worth that comes with that marriage. And also, later on in verse 32, talks about it is the union between Christ and the church. It is an example of how much God loves the church. It's modeled for how a husband and wife are, how a marriage, how sex within a marriage should be like. It's a token of intimacy. Then we have the third one, which says that our bodies are immoral. They are objects, right? Earlier on we talked about our bodies are being objects, physical objects, the division of the person from the physical. So our bodies are just being objects, and they're immoral. Are they really immoral? This time now, it is actually promoted by a famous utilitarian. You know, utilitarianism comes from the word utility. Utility means to make use of. Pragmatism, to be able to make use of whatever is practical. So this famous utilitarianism is Australian by the name of Peter Singer. He says that our bodies are morally neutral. In other words, you can use it any way you want. There's no moral issue. Why confuse ourselves with moral issues? Use the body any way we want. So therefore, sex and everything else that's within our body has got no moral significance and no moral consequences. But not only that, he's not the only one. Right from long ago, you know who is Sigmund Freud, right? He says sex is an instinct. And there are others. Margaret Sanger is a famous feminist who lived about 30, 40 years ago. And she says sex is salvation for the female, you know. And Alfred Kinsey. Now, Kinsey, by the way, is an entomologist. Anyone even know what an entomologist is? Insects, expert in insects. He became an expert in sex. All right, there's now, you heard of the Kinsey Institute? He is the founder of Kinsey Institute. I don't know how he made the transition from expert in insects to, well, maybe the in is taken away, sex, and changed CT to place of an X. But he talked about the pseudoscience of sex. There's, you know, there are other terms, New Age, that sex can become an object of worship. And Michel Foucault, another Frenchman who I don't know, today is a lot of French, but I don't speak French. He says that sex is even more important. So he believes in language being the power by which we can manipulate people. And those who hold power over language hold power over other people. So he says even sex is even more important than our soul. But then again, are human beings all immoral? Or not immoral, amoral. Human beings are actually moral. This is from scientific research, not just from the Bible or not just from the holy books. The research has shown that human choices are not totally irrelevant in the formation of sexual orientation. These are from sociological studies. And sexual orientation is shaped and reshaped by a cascade of choices. You know, there's all this story that goes around the internet. You can look it up. The story of the Kennedy family, and then the story of Jonathan Edwards, and then there's a story of another Zachary. I can't remember the surname. And it shows generations after generations after generations of robbers, prostitutes, beggars, people who would go to lengths to cheat, lie, steal in order to earn a living. And then Jonathan Edwards' family, who had presidents, bankers, honest people and all that coming down the family. And we believe that sociological studies, that these are a series, not just because it's in the genes, but because they made the right choices and culturally they adopted the right culture. There's this famous studies by Barnes and Parsons, BNP, and they actually say that these choices are important in determining how we orientate our sexual behavior. And these choices, when we make, ranges from little children who are not able to make, and then to adults who are able to make choices. And it's the same, even for adults too. Some of us can make good choices, some of us don't. And even though there are some genes that are so-called behavioral genes, like for example, the gene that predisposes towards watching TV. I must confess, I have the gene in me, but I still make the choice. I can discipline myself in order not to want to watch TV. It is still a preference at the end of the day. So, the conclusion from all this is that it does not render human choices irrelevant to the formation of sexual orientation. And secondly, the research findings have no direct bearing on moral debate that has to do with sexual feelings. So in other words, morality does feature in sex. Then we go on to sex just fulfills a physical urge in the eyes of the world. But in the eyes, from a Christian perspective, sex is an ultimate expression of a relationship. What do I mean by that? We talk about Peter Singer talking about sex, right, being immoral. So therefore, as a result of that, sex has been reduced to a physical urge. What sort of physical urge is it? It's nothing more than a hunger pact. But from a Christian perspective, it says in Proverbs, this is the way of an adulteress. She eats and wipes her mouth and says, I've done nothing wrong. It sounds very much like a person who's amoral or immoral would say that. So therefore, in sex, there's an ultimate expression of intimate relationship. So just now we were talking about dating, right? So without all the entanglement of dating, is it really satisfying by putting aside, all the wooing and the roses and the whining and dining and all that? Actually, it's still very hard work to dissociate the feeling from sex itself. After a while, maybe it might work for the first instance, second instance, but sex becomes meaningless. And then, where do you go? It's like chasing after the rainbow. You reach the end of it, but it's not there. And you go further again, and you go further again. People will want more. At the end of the day, what really matters is a genuine relationship. People want authenticity. People want relationships. No matter how much they say they want to discard the trouble that comes with it. So therefore, why don't people seek it? Because there's intense pressure not to express the dissatisfaction. People wouldn't dare say, when men get together, they will boast about the sexual exploits, but won't say, actually, at the end of the day, I would rather want to settle down with someone. But that is actually the inner desire of a lot of people. That includes women too, although I quoted an example of men. So what do? They turn to alcohol, abusive relationships, prostitution, human trafficking, and all the other things that come along with it. Bible again says that intimate relationship, the whole book of Song of Songs, some says it is a forbidden literature because there's so many references to sexual behavior and intimacy in that book. But it expresses the true relationship, the authentic relationship that many desire for, and that is written within the Holy Book itself. It says in Songs of Songs, chapter 2, my beloved is mine and I am his. And who is this I and his? It refers to God and human being, the creator and the creation. And his man over me at the end of the day is love. So, we're coming to it. Thank you for bearing with me. We're coming to an end. So, now the last two parts is gender identity. It leads a lot of times the world and what is taught in school says that it's based on genetic, it's based on the physical, and it's beyond human control. But for the Christian perspective, there is the role of a human choice, and there's an interplay of both biological and environmental factors. Where do I go from there? What do I mean by that? It basically means there's the interplay of psychological and environmental theories. That is not only just nature or nurture, but an interplay of these two. But a lot of this research that says it's an interplay of these two has been ignored generally by certain lobbyists who has a personal agenda or a group agenda to pursue. So as a result of that, the favor of genetic and antenatal hormone theories become very prominent. People promote that all the time. So even scientists tend to go towards that and agree with that. So therefore, they say that it's determined by your genes, it's determined by your hormones, it's determined by your physiology. You can't do anything about it. However, an important study named the Bailey study has shown that genetic factors have no significant contribution to our sexuality. Remember I was talking about the Kinsey institution? This famous report, Kinsey report, says that about 10% of people are actively involved in same-sex relationships at any one time, even as high as 37, 1/3. That means out of this whole group, 1 out of 3 of you are involved in a same-sex relationship at one time. Alarming figures. But these are figures that are generally accepted by people, especially in America. But there were recent studies and the polls that were taken that any one time there were 2 to 3% of males, a big difference between 37 and 3%, being homosexually active in any given year, and females is even smaller, 2%. So for any sustained gay activities, it is estimated around the world, even take into consideration other countries, less than 5% are actually indulging in same-sex relationships. So, but because these reports have been made so prominent and a certain interested party that promotes the report, the argument for gays or the LGBT lobby becomes very strong. And they will say, since there are so many, 1/3, 1 out of 3 are involved in this LGBT lobby, therefore it is not a moral concern. Why are you all making so much fuss about it? Why are you discriminating against a significant group of people? And they will label the majority, even though they're majority, as being ignorant. They are traditionalists. Because the research proves so, but it's not so. And at the end of the day, there are other studies. This is only one of them, the Banks and Parsons study. And at the end of the day, basically what scientific research shows that there is no conclusive evidence that it is genes that cause it, and it is still an interplay. Which one is a higher role? The environmental factors or genes has a higher role? No one knows for sure. But let me quote this person, Francis Collins. You heard of the Human Genome Project? Wow, suddenly there's a lot of coughing. It must be something that I'm breathing out. I need durians today. Okay, right. Francis Collins is the head of the Human Genome Project. And he has been, He has been saying this thing: sexual orientation is genetically influenced, but not hardwired by DNA. And whatever genes are involved represent a predisposition and not a predetermination. Right? So, I would like to close with this. Many times, those that make a stand or speak out against LGBT says that when you do so, you're discriminating, and by causing people who are of the LGBT inclination to change, or even with different gender identity, to revert back to their naturally assigned identity, it will cause psychosocial damage to them. But is it really so? It is what has been assigned as birth has always remained in the background. And then at some point in every person's life, there will be of what we call gender dysphoria. That means there's a bit of confusion. Even a young boy, a young girl may feel that, there are certain things that a young boy may like playing with masak-masak, with girls' toys, or even a girl may want to play with guns. These are stereotypes that are meant to be broken. And it does not necessarily mean that they have an inclination towards a change in gender identity. But in others, in a small minority, it can be true. It can lead to a prolonged sense of disharmony and distress in a situation what we call gender dysphoria. And they have this fear in them. And we need to recognize that even if whether you are straight or gay, and I'm sure that even though if you may be straight, you have to come to an understanding that these people do go through a series of emotional turmoil, one of which the biggest is fear. They feel trapped, they feel isolated, they feel misunderstood, and they feel rejected by society. And when that is so, how should the Christians therefore respond to it? Not only just as a person-to-person basis, but in the wider culture, in the media, how should we respond to someone who's transitioning gender or has different sexual preferences? First of all, there are two types of response, either disgust or affirmation. Either you say, oh, this is terrible. At one point there's this term called homophobia, that whenever you come across someone with the same sex affiliation, you sort of shun them or you cast them aside and say, yuck, I don't want to associate with these people. Or on the other hand, there's this group that say, that's great, you are being yourself. Earlier on we talked about freedom to express yourselves, right? You're expressing yourselves freely. That's so great, but we believe that neither approach is appropriate. They are just emotional responses that do not give a good outcome at the end of the day. But what needs to be conveyed to them is that of our worth, individual worth that we have. And that all of us, whether we're straight or gay, they're all made in God's image. And we are greatly loved too. So therefore, we should treat each other with respect, with compassion, and empathy. And to understand the distress that certain people with different sexual orientation are going through. And on top of that, there is also a positive biblical worldview on that affirms the value of the body and the unity of the human being. You remember the person and the body? It is one. We are all made as body, soul, and spirit as one. So, we at the end of the day, the brokenness that comes from the fall has been translated into a feeling of rejection, of unworthiness, and therefore it results in a lot of this aberration from a natural assignment of sexual identity or gender identity. So, what should therefore be our response? We have to take into consideration that a church like this, is not a museum for saints. We are not here to say that every Christian has achieved it, we are on the right track, and we should gloat in it, but instead recognize that within us, all of us, we are a hospital for sinners. And that's what a church is after all. We need to recognize people with gender dysphoria or even different sexual orientation and to go the extra mile. After all, Jesus teaches Christians to go the extra mile, to offer the other cheek if slapped on one side. So we need to take the extra effort to journey with them and to understand that many of them will go through a post-traumatic growth. And I just like to close with this last question. I'm sure it will be on your mind. If I don't treat it, you will be asked, can homosexuality be changed? The important thing is that the church moral concern should not be changing the experience or the appearances of those with same-sex attraction. We should not be concerned with that. But what we should be concerned with is that the person's choice in suppressing this, to express these inclinations, that to help the person to come to a realization that after all, it is a choice. You have been under the deception that many have been telling you that it's not a choice, you've got no control over it. So therefore, when they come to the understanding that you have a choice, then the next choice they have to make is that they would want to demonstrate obedience or not to demonstrate obedience to God's revealed will towards such behavior. And what is God's revealed will to such behavior? The Bible is pretty clear on it. In Leviticus 18, it says, don't lie a man with another man. And 1 Corinthians 6, even in the New Testament, that these are offenses and abomination in God's sight. But again, these are not verses that we should bandy about and say, there you go, the Bible says you are wrong. It's not about that. It's helping them to come into a realization that at the end of the day, you have a choice to turn your back towards your Creator or to continue the journey on in the personal preference. So therefore, our moral concern from a Christian perspective is that we change by what matters. It is the same biblical narrative on humans' approach to sin, which is our helplessness. We have no ability, you and I have no ability to change someone who has a gender identity challenge or even a different sexual orientation to change them. But we need to rely on God's grace. We need to rely on God's grace. And if you were to think that the person needs to change into what? Back into heterosexuality? Well, the homosexual, they're Christians who have these inclinations, but they are not compelled to change their sexual orientation. Nor should we promise them that God will empower you to change. At the end of the day, we need to journey with that person and to bring them into a realization that God's desire is costly discipleship. As many of the other things we have to give up, like we give up smoking, we give up drinking, we give up womanizing or cougaring or whichever they call it nowadays. or I have to be fair, see, when I use one sex as example, I have to use the other sex too. So whichever it is, discipleship is costly. And this is just one of the many expressions of discipleship. And we should not focus on that being the major thing. It is about being a disciple of Christ. If you are a Christian and you're speaking to someone who comes from a different faith. So therefore, we need to direct the person from being happiness driven and from just fulfilling sexual gratification to following the path, the straight and narrow path of a disciple. And that I would like to conclude. Thank you so much for your attention.